Okay, welcome back to the Bricks Quilt, Halloween Bricks Quilt I should say. What we're going to do now is square up our rectangles and we're just going to make sure that they're lined up on the sides so that when we go to sew them together that they're all the same size. Don't get overzealous on this and cut too much, because if you do then you're going to be out of line. So let me show you how much I'm trimming. That is how much, just a sliver. And you want to do that on all of these, every single one. And I can tell this one's going to get trimmed a little bit more than that other side. And I think that's straight without sticking my head in the camera. Here's how much we trimmed off again. So now if we look at it, it should be straight. Okay, so I'm gonna just go ahead and finish that behind the scenes and I'll be back with the next step. Okay, while we're at the cutting station, we're gonna go ahead and trim the salvage off of our jelly roll strips. These jelly roll strips are for our sashing. So the sashing's gonna go on the top of the quilt, on the bottom of the quilt, to the left and to the right, and then after each row of rectangles. So we're gonna have a row of sashing after this, and then we'll add this, and then we'll have another. So what I'm going to do now is just trim the salvage so that we can sew all of our jelly roll strips together. And I'll show you one on camera, and then I'll do the rest behind the scenes so that we can get this video moving along. All I'm going to do is just make sure I have this straight. And I will admit that normally I do press these before I trim them just to make them straighter. And I apologize for this very large ruler. This is the only one I have in my office at the moment. Okay, all I'm removing is the salvage, and you can tell the salvage by all those little teeny tiny dots. Okay, so I will be back at the sewing machine. Okay, we are ready to sew our rectangles together. We're going to start with this pattern, and what we're going to do is pick up the first piece and then the second piece, and we're going to place them right sides together, and then we're going to sew it a 1/4 inch seam down the right hand side. So I'm going to place that here on my sewing machine, making sure it's lined up. I've got my 1/4 inch seam with guide foot on my sewing machine, and so now I'm just going to sew. I'm back stitching. And once I'm done with this one, I'm going to pick up the next one, and I'm going to repeat until I get to the end of the stack. Okay, when you get to the end, you're going to take the stack of rectangles that did not get a white rectangle, and we're going to sew it to the bottom of this row. So I'm going to pick up my spider pattern here, and I'm going to sew it at the very bottom. I'm placing it right sides together, just like the other. I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on the right hand side. Now you'll notice that this row does not have a white rectangle at the bottom or at the very top. So this row is actually complete, and we want to repeat this process on the rest of the rows. So I'm going to set this aside for now that it's complete. Okay, so we're going to repeat that on all the rest of the rows. And so now what we're going to do is set this aside and pick up 2 of our jelly roll strips. So I've got strip 1 right here, and then I'm going to pick up another one. We're going to place those right sides together, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. So for all of your jelly roll strips, you're just going to sew 2 of them together, leaving you pairs. So again, I'm placing this on my sewing machine and just sewing a 1/4 inch seam. When I'm done with this, what I'll do is actually press those seams open, and I will show you that in the next part. Okay, so here's what it looks like with 2 strips sewn together. So it's just one really long strip, and we want to sew the rest of them. So I'll do that behind the scenes. Okay, so I've got all of my rectangles sewn together, and this is row 1. And I'm just going to pull this up and show you this is the entire row. Now what we want to do is press our seams again, and I want to go ahead and show you really quick the rows. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so I'm going to set the rest of them aside. I'm just going to pick up row 1, and what I want to do is press my seams flat. Okay, so I'm going to start with this first one, slide it down, and this just makes it a whole lot easier when you're sewing. I promise you. There for a while I tried skipping pressing the seams, and yeah, nothing lined up properly. So this step really helps. Okay, come on. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that process on the rest of the rows, and now what I'm going to show you is the jelly roll strip. Okay, so now what we want to do is press open our seam and our jelly roll strip. Let me get this out of the way. And that's all I'm going to do to the jelly roll strips, is just press the seam open. Now I'll show you the next step. Okay, so I've got row 1 here, and what I want to do is find that seam that I just pressed open, and I want to line that up with a seam on row 1. Okay, so it looks like this is going to be where it's going to get attached. So what I'm going to do first is go ahead and pin this. Make sure I'm lining it up. Okay, so now I'm going to work my way to the left, pinning it. And after I sew it, I'm going to trim that extra, and I'll show you that in just a second. Again, you don't have to pin. You could just take this entire piece over to your sewing machine, but I do like to pin. Okay, we are ready to take our first row and sew a 1/4 inch seam on the right hand side all the way to the end. So I'm going to start here at the very top, and I am going to back stitch. What I show you on this row is what I'll be repeating on all the rest of them, so I won't film that, but I will film the entire first row here, so sewing it all the way from the top to the very bottom. And I just want to make sure that my seams are lying flat. So if you watch it, notice that sometimes I'll raise it up and just make sure that the underside is flat.